Hi everyone, welcome to Dante. Is this week 6 or 7, Elias? I'm losing count.
Oh, gee, yeah, I think six, but I might be wrong.
I was thinking 7, but I could be wrong. Um, I'm not good at
Yeah,
counting.
actually, that sounds right. That sounds right.
I make no claims. All right, do you want to lead us? Do you want to lead us into hell?
All right, further, deeper, worse and worse. Um, I was thinking, we're reading one part, one third of a long epic, and we're reading this as moderns. And I was thinking, if you really wanted a more realistic sense of the Middle Ages, you wouldn't necessarily begin by reading the Inferno, which I was kind of laughing, thinking that it reinforces every stereotype that, you know, chronologically superior moderns have about particularly the Middle Ages or any other earlier period. So the rest of the poem goes further, and there are some other kind of wonderful things that you learn about life there and how different it was in that world. But from Dante's tour, he makes it a pretty grim place for the most part. Although he's appealing to something that he thinks is real. So we got three cantos here. Starting out with in Canto 19, this is his first kind of full-blown indictment of one of the great problems in the world, which is the imbalance in powers. And so it's the papacy, the church, and the people who run it. And it's particularly the church's sense of being just another power player and an avaricious one. So he's talking here about clerical figures. You remember uh, before in earlier cantos here, he was talking about corrupted innocence in antiquity and in lay figures, Gisola Bella, Hypsipyle, um, innocence corrupted. Now we're talking about spiritual corruption. And he begins with this apostrophe. He begins with this rhetorical trick of sort of identifying, or I'm sorry, addressing some sort of imaginary audience or figure. Simon Magus is the figure he begins with. And I thought maybe somebody could just read the opening, um, beginning from the top all the way down through maybe line 11. And with what justice is your power assigned? Would somebody like to help us jump in here? Feel free. Anybody? Beginning through 11.
All right.
Any
I,
takers?
I'll go.
I seem to have this job. Wait, I heard another
Great.
voice there.
I
Court,
said
go
I'll
for it,
go.
man.
Either
Do it.
one. You're both good. Either one.
I defer to court.
Okay.
Through line 11.
Line 11. With what justice? Yeah.
Right. Oh, Simon Magus. Oh, you wretched crowd. Oh, those who follow him and prostitute in your rapacity the things of God, which should be brides of righteousness to get silver and gold. It is time the trumpet sounded for you. The third pouch is where you were put. Now we are at the next tomb, having ascended to where the ridge hangs over the fosse's middle. O supreme wisdom, your mighty art is extended through heaven, on earth, and in the world of evil. And with what justice is your power assigned?
Yeah. This figure, Simon Magus, his name Magus is the Latin word for magician, by the way. He's a figure out of the book of Acts. He comes up to Peter in the book of Acts and wants to know how he can kind of buy his way into sacramental power. What the church will begin to talk about is sacramental power, the power bringing or invoking the Holy Spirit through the laying on of hands. So Dante just goes off in this kind of lofty metaphysical, or I'm sorry, metaphorical, I mean to say anger at the kind of the public wrong here. And he uses kind of sexualized language. Um, and also in doing that, it's more than just sexualized, it's also kind of like mystical theology. And this has to do with the idea that the church was a bride, either the bride of Christ or the Pope bridegroom's, consort. This goes back even into this kind of language goes back even to the Song of Songs, I guess. But anyway, it sounds very offensive that spiritual things should be sold or exchanged for temporal things. Um, Even today, Catholic bishops, for example, wear a special ring, a kind of a marriage ring in a sense, meaning they are married to the church and the people of their diocese. So this is all, treated as stuff you don't mess around with. So his indignation is that it became a traffic. Um, and he's going to go after three popes. I think I read somewhere in Paradiso, there are two popes. In Purgatorio, there are two popes. And in hell, there are four popes. So that gives you some idea of like what his attitude was. We have three of them that are going to come up here. Nicholas III, um, whom he'll be addressing shortly. Boniface VIII, who's the Pope of more or less his active life. Nicholas III went back to his boyhood. And then finally, Clement V, who was the Pope of Dante's exile. These are kind of in increasing degrees of venality. So what's about to happen here is that he is going to encounter Nicholas, and there's going to be another of these things that Dante does in such an artful way. It's a dialogue of kind of confused identity. Things are never clean and orderly, particularly in hell. There's always this kind of painful confusion. There's another strange thing here, very medieval, which is the nature of this punishment. The propaginazione was a real form of capital punishment used at the time for hired killers, in particular, assassins. And it is the punishment of being stuffed upside down into a suffocating place where you die. So Dante's imagining this as the popes being stuffed one on top of the other, the latest pushing the others further down. It's pretty gruesome. And so Nicholas is the first of this. And in this section, what's happening here is that Dante asks Virgil, who is the one that he sees a figure head down, his feet in the air, and he's squirming. This is just before line 30. And Dante says, Master, tell me, who is that one who seems to squirm the most and to be sucked by the reddest flames? And Virgil explains, first of all, I'm going to carry you down the slope. So this is going to happen several more times. It's as though Virgil becomes sort of a physical carrier, a literal carrier of Dante to get him through this alive. Then you can speak with him directly and hear from him about himself and his misdeeds. And Dante says, fine. So they go down, and then Dante addresses this figure with his feet in the air, saying, I began, O miserable soul, whoever you are, planted here like a fence post upside down. Speak if you can. I stood as does the friar who has confessed a vile assassin, head down and tied in place, who calls him back to defer death for a little while. And then he cried, Boniface, are you standing here already? The writing lied by several years. Are you so soon replete with all that getting for which you weren't afraid to take the beautiful lady by deceit and then to do her outrage. So there's a confusion here. Nicholas thinks he's hearing his successor, and Dante is kind of giving away something here. Technically, although he's pretty careful in the poem never to mention a living soul, he is predicting in a way what is about to happen to Boniface. And I think I mentioned before, Boniface is in many ways his number one enemy, both in terms of sort of geopolitics and even personally, because it was Boniface's people that influenced the Florentines to, indirectly anyway, to exile Dante. So he has a grievous axe to grind here with Boniface. Um, so also because Boniface was dominating, Florence's political life, and here he's signaling that Boniface will be damned, damning him in the words of Nicholas, even denying him, and this is sort of curious, the chance of repentance. Dante is saying, even though, you know, he knows that there could have been this possibility, there's no chance of repentance for Boniface in the way Dante tells the story. So let's see. Did I see a question? Was that Andrew?
I did, but I was well, I was just thinking that the upside down perforated floor, it was also sort of like pockets into which
Yeah,
money would flow as well. So there's sort of this
yeah,
double, but
yeah.
I don't know that that's really the case. But it's sort of like that anyway.
Well, a bit. Well, certainly these bolgia are purses, or pouches, they're called. We saw the usurers with their pouches hanging around their neck. And there is kind of a sense that this part of hell is one great coin sack, in kind of a more metaphorical sense.
Yeah.
So there is maybe that in the background. So um, he Dante's a little stymied by this. He doesn't immediately respond. And Virgil not only tells him to go ahead and speak up, but even tells him sort of what to say. And then so Dante speaks to Nicholas and says, let's see here. Sorry, no, it's Nicholas saying, I'm looking at around 60 and a little after. What do you ask me then? If you were brought down for the bank to discover who I am, then know that I was vested with a great mantle of power, a son who truly came out of the she-bear, which refers to his family. I longed so much to advance the cubs that filling my purse was my great aim. And here I have pursed myself. Again, playing with that metaphor and so on. So Dante also is, you know, respectful of the office. Let's put it that way. And I think he says this elsewhere in a couple of places. He's not criticizing the entire Catholic Church. He's saying that the papacy is going through this run of bad people and they are betraying the office. That is essentially his complaint. He even goes back to the book of Revelation and uses this kind of apocalyptic imagery. Um, the church in these kind of monstrous depictions, she that sitteth upon the waters, um, which is interesting because in the book of Revelation, of course, this was an apocalyptic book addressing Rome, the Roman Empire. But by the time we get to Dante, Dante has now a different vision of Rome and what Rome is about. Rome is kind of the prophetic culture that laid the groundwork for the coming of the revelation, the coming of the gospel. So he is not really thinking the way the author of the book of Revelation, John, was thinking. He has a different understanding of what Rome is. Um, One other thing here, so he refers to that reverence for the great keys down in line about 95 or so. So that's still there in Dante. It's the abuse of the keys that he is upset about. And part of the story here, I'll just mention, um, if you go a little further, when he's talking about um, avarice likes yours distributing grief, this is at the top of 157, afflicting the world by trampling on the good and raising the wicked. Shepherds like yourself, the evangelist intended when he said that she who sits upon the waters was seen by him, this is the church, in fornication with kings. She had 7 heads from birth, and from 10 horns had drawn her strength, so long as virtue pleased her spouse. You made a god of gold and silver, wherein is it you differ from the idolatrous, save that you worship 100, they but one. So that kind of violent apocalyptic language drawing from Revelation. And then here comes another apostrophe. And there's an interesting kind of historical thing here about the Emperor Constantine, who, as you're maybe aware, he sort of made the Christian church the official church of the empire. He also moved the empire to Byzantium. But there was another thing going on that was influencing um, Dante's world and had been for several centuries. It was the idea that there was a donation by the Emperor Constantine of imperial power to the church. He'd sort of handed over, it was called the donation of Constantine, out of gratitude for supposedly being healed by a pope of leprosy, was the story. He wrote a document called the Donation of Constantine. So this was a lot of the source of the church's power in the early Middle Ages. Um, and so this was finally proved to be a forgery centuries after Dante, when finally people had a sense of philology and were able to tell the difference between second century Latin and 8th century Latin. But Dante did not know this was coming. And at the time, the church was still holding up this document, this donation of Constantine, is like the writ that enabled them to exercise all this worldly power and raise an army and behave just like any other kingdom, essentially in many ways. But it was a forgery, and it was a humanist named Lorenzo Valla who exposed it too late for Dante and all of that in the 15th century. So Dante thinks it's legit, but a big problem. And he thinks the way Dante thinks of it is the dowry that corrupted the bride. So, any thoughts on any of that?
It's quite an impressive rant of Dante's, I would say. I
It
mean,
is.
I don't think we'd run into anything quite like it. Starting in the Pinsky, I guess it's at 86. The pray tell me how much treasure did our Lord ask St. Peter,
No,
and
exactly. Yes.
and going all the way to 111. And he's, by the end, it's almost as if he's shouting, you know.
Yes.
Although he says he's singing it, which is also interesting. I just think that
Yeah,
again, there hasn't been any kind of Dante outburst quite like this,
you're right.
in the
And
poem so far. And it
that's
goes
right.
into the next part, which I found fascinating, which is I know he'd been carried down into this Bolgia, but the way he's carried out of it is
Hmm.
really remarkable. Um, that 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 um Virgil,
Embracing
embracing
him.
him
Yeah, yeah,
and with such pleasure, like he's so happy, Virgil is, that Dante has
yeah.
expressed his thoughts, but Dante also seems almost exhausted by
Hmm.
his
Yeah,
outburst, that he can't,
yes.
and that Virgil has to carry him out. It's actually really, he lifted me in his
This
arms again, my
th
weight
this is a
full on
great
his
point.
chest.
There's a real physicality Even the physical sense of walking, endless walking, the pilgrim down and then up. Mandelstam, the Russian poet, really picked up on that and asked somewhere, how many pairs of sandals did Dante wear out, crossing Italy in his exile and so on, Um,
But
it,
I,
it,
I
it,
feel that
it
it's
takes it,
also it's his it's what he's talking about that's exhausted him here. It's
yeah, that's true too.
the passion he feels about this particular
Right.
moment in time with Boniface and the church in general. So
Yeah, indeed.
it's also
Yeah,
interesting that the church is going to move at this point, right? Like
yeah,
the
the
next pope after
Avignon
Boniface, who Dante knows is going to take them over to Avignon, which is
and right,
which is really undermining Dante's whole vision of
the
Rome.
Avignon
And
captivity.
yeah,
That's right. Yep,
anyway,
a bad time. Yeah, Daphne.
I am I, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just wanted to point out that there's a whole slew of paintings by Botticelli, and
Mm.
the one I posted is Canto 19. I mean, there's more of Botticelli on Canto
Oh,
19.
yes. Thank you. Yes.
So, yeah, I just put one of them up there.
It's very different from Doré. It's very sort of ethereal and I don't it's a very different sort of aesthetic style and all that naturally because it's Botticelli from the Renaissance, but it's wonderful stuff. I haven't looked at it as closely as I need to, but thank you for posting that because he's the other great illustrator that people think of around Dante. Johanna?
Kanto gets me to thinking again too. Is it's interesting that Dante has no problem criticizing the structure and the procedures that are part of the church, but yet he never considers the theology, which is, of course, I would say also
Hmm.
very medieval, that one does not criticize the theology, one might criticize the structure, but not the theology. So, what I mean by
Hmm.
theology is just the sort of the basis upon which Catholicism is founded. And it's
Yeah,
interesting
yeah.
because he keeps calling Virgil, "You are my Lord." I have the
Hmm.
another version of this, but another publication of this, but this is around Kant, around line 34, 35. He says, "And I, what will you? I will. You are my Lord." So
Hmm.
I find it ironic and paradoxical that on the one hand, here is this pagan who seems to have all the wisdom and a
Right.
certain kind of spirituality, and Dante is never criticizing the theology that has corrupted, that is a corrupted basis of the church, because it's Constantine
Yeah.
and his fellows that made this all up. And
Yeah.
so I thought I would just offer that because it continuously, it's particularly this part of the poem, continuously asks, for me, evokes these questions about why
Yeah.
not the theology.
Yeah.
I would be criticizing both because the theology that the
Hmm.
popes are using have corrupted the church, have made the church something other than it supposedly was. So
Yeah.
I'm a cynical Catholic, so hence the reason this keeps coming up for me.
The commentators can't decide how faithful Dante is. So you will find people that say, well, he's just following Thomas, St. Thomas Aquinas. And there is a lot of Thomas was just before Dante, 20, 30 years before. Dante seems to have known his work and all that. Thomas was not like perfectly or quickly accepted as the Orthodox line right away. After all, he brought in this pagan Aristotle into the conversation, and not all the church authorities could kind of wrap their heads around that. But on the other hand, there are times when you really wonder if maybe he's just going his own way. He just doesn't seem to be very concerned about whether he is conforming to some strict book of doctrine or something. So there seems to be a lot of room for Dante to maneuver, which is why I was saying he seems to be his own man a lot of the time. Yeah, Court.
Just two things quickly. Back to what we were talking about at the beginning, that the danger of seeing this story through a different lens historically.
Hmm.
I read this as a protest song.
Yeah,
He
yeah,
says he's swinging. I saw him protesting against the church, but then the other thing is, I speaking of the theology, I found myself seeing the seeds of Reformation here, seeing the seeds of
yeah,
um,
yeah, yeah,
opposition to indulgences and that kind of
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
It's but again, I don't think that's appropriate. I think that's I'm 150 years ahead of him there, but
No, right. Well,
uh,
seeds is a good word because I think he
yeah.
was used. I think he was his the book was used for those purposes,
Mm.
later. So he does seem to have some sense of what a primitive church. I mean, Dante has this sense that things were better, both in Florence and maybe in Christendom, so-called, a long time ago. So he is kind of paradoxical in that way. In one way, he's very radical. Overthrow the man, overthrow the power that is dominating us. And I don't care if it's the church. And yet, on the other hand, he wants to go back to something more uh, uncorrupted.
And
make
Andrew?
make Florence great again.
he's not
Sorry?
the only one though. Chaucer is doing the same thing in the
Oh,
Partner's
absolutely.
Tale.
Sure. No, no.
It's
Yeah,
just,
yeah. Of course. Of course.
I think the Middle Ages provoke this kind of conversation.
That's right. We haven't even
Dante's
talked about the mendicant, friars and Francis and that whole kind of movement of priests and consecrated people that were very anti-materialistic. So there's definitely some radicalism under the surface there. Yeah, Andrew.
Yeah, I was going to mention Dante's relationship to the Franciscans and his
Hmm.
appreciation of them, I guess even more than appreciation. Also,
Yeah.
on a side note of that, before I make one other point, is that right now the bones of Saint Francis have been revealed. They're in Assisi now. You can go and
Oh, yeah.
stand in line and go and look at them if you so choose. So
I
if you've
see.
got
I didn't know that.
Samantha, you're
Huh.
close, maybe you take a little trip to Assisi to walk by St. Francis's bones. They're in a glass
Close.
case, and apparently hundreds and hundreds of people are lining up to
Oh,
take a
wow.
quick
Huh.
look. So
Do
Yeah.
they have to
Where?
pay a fee?
in Assisi,
Oh, I've been there. Have you ever? I visited. Have you ever been
no,
there?
I haven't been. I just read in the news that this is happening right now. They were released to public viewing about a week ago, I think, or
Oh,
two
no
weeks
kidding.
ago.
Oh, okay, that's
Interesting.
new. So yeah, the church I've been to in Assisi, which is
And I just wanted to say one other thing in relation to what Johanna was saying, that in a way the well, first there's the Orbach who speaks to this 1,000 years that Dante is kind of
Hmm.
representing in the comedy of bringing Christianity, or the 1,000 years it takes for Christianity to become the cultural norm. and
Hmm.
and it sort of reminded me of the founding fathers in our little period of
Hmm.
time. It's like
Hmm.
everyone, people say the founding fathers, and some sort of culturally accepted thing, this Constitution, and of course Trump is kind of undermining it, but there's this sort of acceptance that that's a good thing, and that's the right thing. And
Right.
in the
Right.
same way that for Dante, the church, it's hard to challenge the theology when it's it's soaked into every pore of the culture.
That's right. Yeah, it was. It truly was.
So
Yes, Art.
Yeah, I was gonna say, well, first of all, yeah, you better hurry if you want to see those bones. I just was on the website this morning, and the reservations are almost completely sold out after it's
This
just
is
been up for a few days. But
more tourism
thankfully,
in Italy. I'm.
I
Oh
got
God,
tickets, so I'll be there
it's
next
a little
week.
place. It can't handle this. This is
Yeah.
not a great idea.
Well, it's anyway. You could always
And
just kind of
you're
show up
and
and
you're in
and
Rome,
hope for the
right?
best.
You're in Rome, right,
Oh
Art?
yeah, yeah. I'm going. Well, actually, not this next
I don't
weekend.
need
The
to
weekend
tell you about
after. Yeah.
tourism, right?
Um, but anyway, I want to
Bring
come
pictures.
back. Oh, pictures? Yeah, I'll try. Um, although I get weird about taking photos of the relics in churches, to be honest. I I want to come back to the language around, in Dante's kind of, in his rant song, um,
Hmm.
because it is really it's so forceful. I mean, you see. I was having a conversation with somebody yesterday and they were getting really worked up and all of a sudden and people especially now have probably had this experience before, I imagine, where people get worked up and then their language gets really kind of aggravated and then it kind of starts to slip into conspiracy, but the language
Hmm.
of conspiracy theory can be very figurative as well, and
Sure.
there's so much symbolism that Dante begins to pack into this, especially around, and obviously I'm working from, the commentary, the whore with the seven,
Hmm.
from
Yeah.
the seven heads and the ten horns and blah blah blah. And but something else, was striking me, that what he's railing against is, again, this kind of transactional nature. I mean, that everything is for
Right.
sale. Obviously, I
Right.
mean, and of course, coming back to, Francesco, I mean, this is totally within that context of Francesco shedding symbolically the wealth of his father in the town square and,
Yeah. Yeah.
becoming totally nude and then being covered and then of course swearing himself to Holy Mother Poverty, so within that context, you see Dante kind of working him up again, railing against the excess of the church in terms of selling the values for gold and silver, this transactional nature, obviously. And I'm just wondering if there's something about the use of that heavily symbolic, figurative language that is
Yeah.
also in some ways kind of a resistance to that transactionalism.
Oh,
That
yeah.
that poetry and the ability for us to kind of speak in multiple languages at the same time allows us to escape the kind of just the cheapness, the crassness of transactional
Very good.
society.
Yeah. Sam, do you have a thought on that? On Aaron's point? That's a great point.
And the transactional,
On using the kind of prophetic language in order to, exert a kind of an influence, or, something that seems literary, or I don't know what term we want to use, in order to push back against politics or power or whatever. That sort of,
yeah,
right? Is
I
that
mean,
basically it, Aaron?
yeah. Did you want to add something? All
Oh,
right.
well, no. I mean, I think that, that condenses it pretty
Hmm.
well. I was the only other thing that I'll add is that, as when we jump ahead in a few cantos, he's going to talk about the seers, and thank you, Elias, for you specifically using the prophetic language, because then then we're going to see the prophets
Yeah.
themselves. And I mean, and it all circles back. I mean, this connection, of course, between poetry and prophecy is always very close, and then you throw madness in there and
Yeah.
Yeah.
here we are again.
Yeah.
But yeah, the central, my kind of central, thought question is, what is it about the power of that language that can
Mhm.
resist political power, or military power, and obviously going back to the Greeks too. I mean, that the seers, the prophets, were the only one in a sense who could often speak truth, and that kind of phrase, whether you like it or not,
Right.
truth to power, right?
Well, they were often appointed. Um, I mean, but there is a relationship between the language of poetry and prophecy historically, and the relationship between poets and metaphysics, which certainly Dante is in. But I think so we have the kind of tradition of the oraculum, and before the oracle at Delphi, you had it was women, right? Women were the first mystics and priestesses and
Hmm.
oracles and prophets. So you had like the priestesses of Dodona, who would read trees, and you would have pilgrims come from all over the world to visit with them in order to learn about the future. But I hear more, when we start thinking about like Cicero and On Divinone, and thinking about that, those seers were political appointees, right? And they often had high positions, almost like court jesters, but they,
Mm-hmm.
they they would also help with war plans, uh,
Yeah.
and determining the best days. But I think there is there is a tradition in the oracular tradition, and in that, um, I'm also thinking about esoteric knowledge, which I hear creeping in there as well. Secret traditions, which are passed down over time, um, which are ways of protesting institutionalized power. I was mostly thinking about how this felt like I think it was where did he go? I think it was Court or Andrew, I can't remember, was talking about the Reformation, but I mostly
Mm-hmm.
read this
Mm-hmm.
almost as a prelude to the Reformation as well, in the way in
Mm-hmm.
which money and greed um,
Mm-hmm.
are institutionalized, and the church itself becomes a means to power instead of about any sort of salvation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Maybe one other thing, and then we'll jump to the next canto. I mean, by reaching back to the book of Revelation, Dante's just saying, I'm referring to the great text from which our whole culture gets its meaning. So there's nothing more authoritative he could do, including going back to Virgil, than going back to scripture and trying to win the argument that way. So that would have been in some kind of complicated way, because the medieval understanding of scripture is multi-leveled, literally. But that's part of the power of what he's trying to argue for.
Could I
Elias,
just
Um,
do you,
say one?
has he,
Oh, sorry. Go on, Bob. Sorry.
Elias, have we seen Dante adopt the prophetic voice before this?
Mm.
well, I mean, depends on what you mean, but I mean, in a way, um, I mean, it's sort of as though the whole poem is like that.
Yeah.
It's called a song. You call it, these are cantos that's associated with singing and so on. And so there's something kind of visionary about it. But if you mean prophet in the sense of a critic of the wrongs of
Biblical.
society,
No, the
this is the
biblical
most,
prophet. Yeah.
yeah, this is the most pointed he's been. This is
Yeah.
the most like Isaiah he's been so far.
Our friend Mazada makes a big deal out of this voice switch in this part.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Th-
Andrew?
Well, I was just going to say that I think part of the issue is that it's very hard for any translator probably to make those shifts in gear as 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 evident as it would be if you knew the original. And I just
Hmm.
wanted to point out that there's a beautiful word in here that I understand that Dante made up
Yeah,
in his little thing, which is this. It's on in his numeration, the numeration of his text. It's 108, and it's putanegere, which
yeah,
is that the fornication of kings, and that word didn't apparently exist, but Dante needed something strong, and
yeah.
and so he devised his own word. And I think that that's also, speaks to the maybe uniqueness of this particular section. And it also, if if there is prophecy, we're going to deal with that right away in the next canto. So,
That's right. That's right.
so we're moving on to the diviners.
Yep.
So I'll leave it at
Yeah.
that.
Let's do that. And as we do that, there's kind of a an interesting air of kind of anxiety the commentators have noticed about this on the topic of divination, because this has to do with Virgil. And I think I mentioned that Virgil's reputation was so great. There's somewhere, it's either in this canto or the one before, Virgil mentions, you memorized my entire poem, tutta quanta. He notes to Dante, recognizing that that's how close to Virgil Dante was. He literally memorized the entire Aeneid, apparently. So, but more than that, he also had this kind of folk reputation in a culture that, did not yet have widespread spread literacy. Virgil was thought of as some kind of a mage, a magus, a magician. And there was this tradition, which seems very weird, of the Sortes Virgilianae, where people do this for the Bible, of course, today. You open the book and put your finger down in a place, and you get some sort of a divination. You get a reading, like it's like throwing the I Ching or something. And Virgil's text was used for that. So what's going on here is that this, on the other hand, you have it's not exactly a debate in the church. The church is against any kind of divination or, Ouija boards, no, none of that. And the thinking is because the church insists on, through Thomas and other people, on free will, no determinism. Can't do that. Um, and so it's a little unclear. Is Dante saying here he's against astrology, root and branch? Or does he also betray that to some degree, actually, he was pretty interested in it? And he sees it as kind of one of those mental frameworks that, were useful and that he was engaged with in various ways, because the use of astrology, and I think, Sam, you were just saying this, was very, very widespread, part of the culture, and was just part of the way you understood how to approach life. The stars have something to do uh, with the way we live. And as you get into the Paradiso, it's going to be the influence of the stars in this medieval model are going to be very important to understanding the poem. So anyway, now we have a canto in which we're going to go back and let Virgil correct the record, sometime later. Um, and there's this terrible scene of sinners who have a punishment that is particularly awful. And so let's see if anybody might like to read. I'll read the opening. The new pains of hell that I saw next demand new lines for this canto 20 of the first canzone, the Inferno as a whole, canzone, which is of those submerged in the underground. Readying myself at the cliff's brink, I looked down into the canyon my master had revealed and saw that it was watered by tears of pain. Would anybody like to pick up from there down through about 22 of our human image so grotesquely reshaped? Anybody want to jump in?
I'll read.
Yeah.
How far
Oh, sorry. Starting with
of our human?
all through the circular valley, I beheld a host of people coming, weeping but mute, down through of our human image so grotesquely reshaped.
Oh, wait, where do you want? I thought that's where we were. Okay. All through the circular valley, I beheld a host of people coming, weeping but mute. They walked at a solemn pace that would be called liturgical here above. But as my sight moved down their bodies, I sensed a strange distortion that made the angle of chin and chest not right. The head was twisted backward, some cruel torsion, forced face toward kidneys, and the people strode backward because deprived of forward vision. Perhaps sometime a palsy has wrung the head of a man straight back like these, or a terrible stroke, but I've never seen one do so, and doubt it could. Reader, God grant you benefit of this book. Try to imagine yourself how I could have kept tears of my own from falling for the sake of our human image, so grotesquely reshaped,
Yeah.
contorted so the eyes' tears fell to wet the buttocks at the cleft. Truly, I wept.
Yeah. So that's very striking. Again, Dante getting very physical, very embodied. This is not allegorical. you know, creating this terrible image. And the commentators are trying to figure out why it's an awful image, but Dante's weeping in this canto is very notable. And does it have to do with this relationship with Virgil, his great teacher, whom he is in a way about to correct publicly, or at least through the poem, he's going to allow him to sort of correct his reputation and so on? Or is Dante connected to this sin? Was he involved in astrology in some dubious way or other? Hard to say. There are hidden matters that he doesn't talk about that are mentioned in the cantos in this section. As they're walking along, Virgil and I discoursed of things that I won't mention for the moment. And you wonder, well, so what was it? And it's something to do with his past life that he is kind of chewing over with Virgil. And this might be an example of one of those things. So he goes back to classical antiquity to find diviners from four different epic poems. And he seems to be here kind of distancing himself a little bit from classical culture. And yet, on the other hand, you'll notice that Virgil rebukes Dante for his tears, saying, this is misplaced pity. In fact, the church taught, this sounds pretty hard, the church taught that it has to be living souls for which you can feel pity, or souls in purgatory. As far as the dead are concerned, the dead in hell, it's case closed. So in a way, Virgil is saying to him, you're kind of breaking the frame a little bit. Don't you know, this is like there's no room for these tears. And again, Dante is creating something new in literature, really, and pushing at the edges of his own theology in order to have a more sort of human reaction. So he mentions these figures from antiquity. Tiresias, one commentator says, who has had kind of a transgender experience, um, and other figures that have a kind of a sexuality around them. And then there's a description of this figure Manto, also in kind of a more crude and kind of a gendered language. So this is about Virgil talking about his hometown. He's from a place called Mantua, and the name is taken from this figure out of the Aeneid. And it seems to be that this part of the conversation is a way for Virgil to kind of explain the actual founding of the city was not about divination. And so even though in his poem, which he notes to Dante, you memorized the whole thing, I know you remember this, it was attributed to some kind of magical source. So he's clearing that up. Whether Dante kind of objected to that whole thing about Virgil and saw him really as a different kind of figure, or maybe more dignified than that kind of magic mumbo jumbo, feels like maybe something like that is going on. Any other thoughts?
Isn't the gist of this that he's correcting Virgil's history?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
I would say.
Yeah, that's
And so
ballsy.
why is he? I guess he's doing that because after all, he's going through these sins. He clearly was disturbed, and taking the church's part in condemning divination because he thought it just robbed human beings of their free will. It was a deterministic scheme used by people for bad ends. But on the other hand, it was also very prevalent in the culture, and it would have been very difficult to kind of find every single example of where it was at work to one degree or another. Yeah, Andrew.
My sense is that he's protecting himself from.
Hmm,
I mean, he's
could
at this
be.
point, he's writing as an exile. He's been, accused, he's been sentenced to death by the town of Florence,
Yeah,
the city. He lives, at the mercy of people who will use his skill set, which isn't that broad, but broad enough to be useful. And he basically takes away from Virgil his meaning from that guy, from his poem, and claims that he knows that his truth, Dante's
Yeah.
truth, is
Oh, I
greater.
see what you're
And
saying. Yeah.
yeah, and then there's also the fact that there's I do know that there was this guy, another poet of Florence, who was also considered a astrologer, scientist, a man of rationality,
Hmm.
who's burnt at the stake, a
Yeah.
few years, after Dante dies. I mean, that things
Yeah.
were a little perilous if you went down the road of accepting a certain kind of power in
Right.
terms of astrology
It
and
is a form of power. That's right.
divination.
Yeah. It's
So
like technical knowledge. Hmm.
yeah, exactly. And so I think that Dante is like I don't see him as being particularly noble in this canto.
I see what you mean.
He's
Yeah. Yeah. That's
he's sort of
interesting.
but I mean, how do you betray your guide and say
Well,
that your truth about
yeah.
his poem is greater than the poem he actually wrote? So, you know.
Well, you're onto a big theme of the poem, which is to try to figure out, is Dante just to Virgil, his great teacher, because he's going to leave him. And in the Purgatorio, there's this moment when suddenly, with no kind of fanfare or emotion, Virgil's just not there any longer. So it seems to me that clearly um, there's this very deep affection for this author who kind of made Dante or awakened Dante. And at the same time, Dante feels ambitious enough to correct a figure like that, sort of like in public in his poem, which is admittedly pretty remarkable. Yeah, Johanna?
Yes, and just a thought too, as we're talking about this prophecy, and there's a kind of hypocrisy here too, because the very
Hmm.
basis of his Christian tradition rests on that. We look at the Holy Scripture, and we talk about Michael the archangel who comes to announce to Mary that she's going to bear
Yeah,
this child. How about the three wise men
yeah,
who come from the east
yeah.
to make the
This
annunciation, the epiphany?
hey,
So it seems to me
undetermined.
that
Yeah.
yeah, he hasn't worked this out because, and you have
Right.
Tiresias who comes, for example, when he goes um, uh, to 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 make his prophecies in the old text, and they come true. So how does he
Yeah.
rectify that? How does he, that? So I find that a little bit. Yeah, I find it
Hmm.
a little hypocritical on his part, as Andrew was saying, the
And
No.
correction.
to add to what Joanna was saying, that it feels incredibly ironic because Dante is giving us his own cosmological system.
Yes, he is.
And we're going to end with the stars. And in
That's
this
right.
canto, there's also called to look up to the stars. Because
Yeah.
stars are spatial way to orient ourselves materially, but there also just wasn't a distinction between astronomy and astrology
That's right.
at this time either. The first geographers were astronomers and astrologers.
Yep. Yep.
It,
Very true.
it well, it also ends the canto. If we go to the Pinsky at
Yeah.
loom, spindle, and thimble for telling of fortunes, potions, waxes, image. Okay, but come already, Cain in the moon positions both hemispheres with his pale blue thorns. That's Cain at that time is the man in the moon,
That's right.
and so the moon is setting. So here we have immediately an astronomical, but probably also astrological kind of bit of content. And
Right.
you know
Right.
and his term closes in the waves below Seville. The round moon that deep in the wood last night brought you no harm. So immediately he sort of goes right to the source of what he's just been running away from, which is
Hmm.
the skies, the heavens above, even though we're in hell. But I
That's
guess
right.
the moon was the symbol of hell at that time, I think.
It's only the moon you can see in
Yeah,
hell, not the
yeah.
sun.
Not the symbol. Yes, the only thing you could see.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
I like that Cain. The Cain is the man in the moon. The next time I look up at the moon, apparently you
Oh
see it
yeah, isn't that
on the
interesting?
face of
Yeah.
a full moon. Look to the right, and if you
Hmm.
want to try to find a figure there he's carrying a bundle of thorns apparently, and
Ah,
this is
yeah.
an image that you can find in medieval culture. So
Huh.
look
Cool.
for Cain, the
Yeah,
wanderer.
very interesting.
So
Huh.
sorry.
Yeah, that's good. He's got, and the thorns are on his back, so they're digging into his
Okay.
back. Yeah,
Okay. Huh.
but
How
that, I
weird.
mean, this is really a. I mean, Dante is right. So when he decides he's going to zoom in on something, it is so
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. All these weird things happen. Sort of associated things happen that you wouldn't think of bringing in. Somehow it all fits for him. Let's go ahead to 21 because there's a lot to talk about there, and we'll just have to do a quick flyover. But we're now going into a part of the poem where this canto 21 and 22 um, are like tavern humor. One of the commentators called it gargoyle cantos, really weird, devilish, sort of grotesquerie is about to go on here. And it's also quite serious for Dante because of the topic, which is barratry, or the sale of political power and influence, which is the major crime that he was, accused of anyway, by the Florentine Council. In other words, this is what got him exiled. And so barratry is the topic, and he's going to bring the same prophetic emotion to this canto, which is again quite long and deserving, according to Dante, of a long conversation. So there, we start out in the beginning, and so he went from bridge to bridge and spoke of things which my commedia does not mean to sing. So again, what is he talking about? It's something from his past life, probably, but he is withholding some information, and this makes us curious. It makes these conversations seem a little more real in a way. You remember back in Canto 4, he was talking with the other poets, but he didn't indicate what they were talking about. Were they just talking shop, talking meters or something? We don't know, but he left that out. And so what he does is he pauses, or they pause, at the top of one of these weird bridges in the Malebolgia to look down into what he calls the wonderfully dark ditch. Um, so dark that it reminds him of this amazing scene in Venice. Venice is one of the big trading empires. It has an enormous shipyard, and the shipyard's called the Arsenal, where they are building the boats. And this wonderful simile comes out, and I'll just read it about line 6 and following. The astounding darkness he's talking about, as is done in winter when the sticky pitch is boiled in the Venetian arsenal to caulk their unsound vessels, while no ship can be sailed. And so instead, one uses the time to make his ship anew. Another one repairs much voyage ribs, and some with hammers strike the prow, and some the stern. And this one makes oars, while that one might twist rope. Another patch the jib and mainsail. So, not by fires, but by some art of heaven, a heavy pitch was boiling there below, which overglued the banks on every side. So, this moment bringing in a different reality, a reality from the living world, the sweet world of time and all of that, and also a scene of a kind of a civic order, an organized enterprise by this big republic, you know, working in some kind of harmony to get all this done. So the contrast will be with these characters who are barrators and who, in a way, in their work, disrupt, confuse, conflict, corrupt the city. And so that's I think what's part of what's behind it. He's going to go on for 2.5 cantos on barratry, or what we say, exploitation, um, misuse of office. And it's he almost treats it as farcical, as we're about to see, as in these medieval miracle plays. The popular conception of hell is a bunch of little black figures with pitchforks, behaving badly and carrying on. This is kind of like the low level that Dante wants to put selling influence, taking bribes, kickbacks, all that. He thinks this is the level at which that is working. A very noble notion, of course. Any thoughts on that so far?
I'm still stuck on our earlier conversation, sort of the opposition to the crude transactionalism, uh,
Yeah,
and and he keeps bringing art to oppose it in one way or the other.
yeah, yeah, yeah. How to understand that? I mean, in in his culture, the book is the medium for everything. The book is media culture. So he's going to make it talk. He's going to make it make noises. It's going to give off a smell.
Mm.
He's going to do everything he can to catch us and hold us. But our visual imaginations, this is where all these, excuse me, wonderful similes come from, because he's trying to paint a picture and convince us that way, even when the topic is something disgusting and lowly and so on. It's I guess part of his, you could say, rhetorical strategy. So political corruption, it's a sticky black pitch. It covers everything. These devils are fighting, they're forking the sinners, trying to push them back under the pitch. It's just, again, comic grotesque. Um, yeah, Andrew?
It's interesting that in this canto, the things are so bad for a moment that when this this first devil, what's his name, Malacoda,
Yeah,
um, confronts them. Virgil has Dante go hide behind some craggy
yes,
rocks, like,
yeah.
and that this is the crime that Dante has been convicted of and has been
Hmm.
sentenced to death for, and so
Hmm.
he better hide, I guess, um, for the
Yeah,
moment, and then there's also just within the poem, there's this sense that Virgil is, he's taking on a lot at that moment. So I thought that that's kind of interesting. And then finally, Dante comes out and is standing with Virgil, but he doesn't really lose his sense of fear and uncertainty as to whether these
yeah,
devils aren't going to go after him. In fact, I think one of the devils says, "Well, oh, come on, let me take a piece
yeah.
out of his
Take a
ass.
whack at him. Yeah, yeah.
Let me leave a little mark on him." And
No,
then the
that's right.
Malakota guy says no. I'd also just one other thing. I'll just point out that I understand that I'm not sure where it is in the Pinsky. It's 110 that we finally get a certain date for the
Yes,
poem.
right, right.
It was yesterday, 5 hours later than now, that the 1266th year fell. So we
Yeah.
know. I don't know why that becomes 1300, but somehow it does.
Hmm. Yeah, we'll get to that in just a moment. But
Oh,
this is
okay.
a
Sorry, I didn't know you were.
no, no problem, no problem.
Sorry about that.
No, no, but that's a great point. Let's see. Well, anybody else want to jump in? I thought I saw someone. Um, the, these this is the Malabulgia, right? The black or the dark pouch, the bad pouch. The these figures are called the Malebranche, the evil claws, and this one figure that is going to negotiate with Virgil is Malacoda, evil tail. And so the devils here all have names, as though it were theater. It is kind of theater in a way, theater of the grotesque, if you like. So it's a scene that is kind of comical. It's going to go on here and in the next canto, as I say. Um, and I think it's John Sinclair who has the Oxford commentary that gives some translations of the names that you see a little bit later on here. I mentioned Malakota is evil tail, Barbaricha, curly beard, Cagnazzo, low hound, Draginazzo, vile dragon, Ciriato, swine face, pig face, Graffiacane, scratch dog, Rubicante, red face, Scarmiglione, tassel top. So I think Dante really relishes, asking us to twist our tongues around these scary, you know, play characters. And he's creating a little scenario here, which we're about to fall into, because Malakota, who is offering to be a negotiator, is setting a trap. And Andrew was just talking about a piece of the trap, which is his volunteering this accurate information on the date, as though this will be a way of kind of duping Virgil and Dante to trust him. So this is for the first time Dante has to hide. And this is kind of a weird thing. Why is he hiding? For one thing, it's in this section of the poem where he is physically threatened. And Virgil gets him through. But if it has anything to do with his exile and his relationship with the death sentence, then maybe there's this kind of sense that his life really was at stake, as it is seemingly here for a moment. So there's that. Um, so Virgil's going to negotiate, and Dante goes along with this, but also in his mind, we suspect, is thinking about the fact that Virgil doesn't have a great record for this. For one thing, he's a little bit tainted because of his association with divination, which we're going to work on, we're going to talk about. But also, you remember back at the gate of Dis, he was not successful in dealing with the evil angels. He had to have a big angel come down from on high to get them through. So, we'll see how Virgil does here. So Malakota steps up in this troop and says he seems to be willing to allow them to pass, as though Virgil's power of reason would be sufficient. So I think in the background there's also that. Once again, Dante's wondering, is that enough? And so he summons Dante out of his hiding place behind the rock. And Dante mentions another little biographical detail, the siege of Caprona in 1298. Dante was part of the militia, had had a little bit of military experience, and evidently was involved in this campaign. It sounds kind of small, but there were a group of Pisans, people from Pisa, in a castle that then was besieged, and they surrendered. And so when they came out, they were allowed to exit the castle safely. But what Dante calls up in the poem is their expression, their kind of terrified expression when they come out of the castle and realize it's completely surrounded by Florentine military, some of whom are on horseback. So he takes that little memory and drops it into the poem, kind of describing his feeling at looking at what he's dealing with here. And then the devils are, in the person of Malakota, they're about to try a trick, as I say, by mixing some truth and some falsehood. The truth is about the time. The truth is about the fact that the bridges are all knocked out. But the falsehood, the trap, is that there is one bridge further down that is still solid they can pass over. That's not the case. And so it looks as though he's simply hoping they can fool Dante and Virgil into proceeding so that they can then maybe attack him unawares or something. So So a truthful lie, the commentators make a really interesting point about this, that a truthful lie, a lie that appears true, is the opposite of Dante's definition of a comedy. A comedy is a truth that at times can appear false. So another sign that always with Dante, there's something going on kind of in the background here. So this kind of burlesque of military behavior and the way the devils are behaving and kind of signaling to each other. Um, and the let's see, let me find the place I want to yeah, Andrew was saying the devils were saying, well, how about if I just, give him a good cut in the rear here? There's still this kind of threatening atmosphere of the demons talking around them. And Malakota, tamps down that demon. And then Malakota says, you can't go farther by this route. This is about 110. Because along this ridge, the sixth arch lies, all shattered at the bottom. And this is the harrowing of hell. This is at the crucifixion, the big earthquake that shook the entirety of hell. The sixth arch lies, all shattered at the bottom. But if you still wish to go forward, a ridge not far from this does have a place where you can cross at will. It was yesterday, 5 hours later than now, that the 1266th year fell, since the road here was ruined. I'm sending a crew out of my company in that direction to see if sinners are taking the air. You go with them, for they'll not harm you in any fashion. And he turns to his captains and lines up the squad. And Dante says, "Oh, master, I don't like this. I don't like this at all. This seems very, very dangerous. They're grinding their teeth. They're glowering at me. They're going to do us some harm." And Virgil says at the very end, "I tell you, have no fear. It is the wretches who boil here that they menace. So let them grind as fiercely as they like and scowl their worst." And so, and now the troop is coming together. They're about to head off with Dante down to find a bridge. And the final, unbelievably ridiculous tercet. But first, each signal their leader with the same grimace, baring their teeth through which the tongue was pressed. And the leader made a trumpet of his ass. And so he sends a kind of loud fart sound as kind of like their final grotesque signal. It's the level in which these guys are working. So anyway, that's how Dante makes it to 22. Any thoughts? What a weird scene. A lot going on there. Yeah, Bob, I think you're muted.
Which part? The trumpet of his ass? That's kind of odd,
The whole
right?
thing. Yeah, it's just, and this is an elaborate byplay about how to believe or not believe this guy. The trap, and the play on corruption. As I was reading this section, I'm kind of an old Chicago guy, and what came to mind was former Governor Rod Blagojevich. After Obama got elected, you know what I'm talking about, Bob? After
Yeah,
Obama
yeah,
got
yeah, yeah.
elected, and
Nice to see him.
The FBI, the governor is talking about his ability to appoint Obama's successor as a senator. And on tape, Blagojevich says, "I've got this thing." He says, "It's freaking golden." And it was that enthusiasm for making some dough
Right.
that put Blagojevich in prison until, of course, Trump pardoned him. But that's the mentality we're talking about here.
Good story. Okay, bye.
Okay, you got to jump. All right. Any other thoughts on barratry and the pitch, the oozy black pitch that corrupts everything?
I'm still stuck on the tears falling on the cleft and the butt cheeks.
No,
Because the imagery throughout here is just
yeah,
bang, bang, bang.
yeah, Yeah, it is. It is dark. It is dark.
I couldn't help with that. That's in the canto before, right? In 20.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right at the beginning of that canto, there's an interesting word, I think, in the Italian. It's in the first tercet where he uses the word sommersi, which I think usually refers to being submerged in water.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
but of course, we're not submerged in water except for all the tears. There's so
Yeah.
many tears in that first beginning that you almost wonder if that's what's submerging our pilgrim and our guide. There's
Yeah.
and Dante does cry a lot. So anyway,
Yeah.
it's just an interesting use of the word so mercy, I think, because other people put it submerged, and the other translations have it in mostly submerged, but I think Pinsky is the one who makes it underground, but others just leave it alone, just
Yeah. Yeah.
submerged. Anyway.
Bob is dropping some Doré images in here in the chat, if you didn't notice. And that is, let's see, which one is that, Bob? Oh, this is The
Uh,
Devil's Fine. This is, I think, the
yeah,
next canto, right?
I think
Where
it's
they're in the
21.
air. Or is that 21? Okay.
I think it's 21, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But I mean, it just gives you a sense of what these awful devils look like.
Yeah. It's
Even,
as though they're like a political gang. This would
yeah,
kind of make sense if you think about a small town, a small city in Italy. You've got your own people, you know. I remember, here's another Chicago story. I don't know, Bob, are you a Chicago guy? Is that why you recognize the,
yeah, I live here.
oh,
I
you're in,
live in Chicago. Yeah, yeah.
there was a politician named Eddie Verdoliak who was on the city council for a long time, and everybody knew he was all mobbed up, as they said. And I was
Yeah.
once in a restaurant in Chicago when he walked in with his guys,
Right.
like 4 or 5 guys, and
Yeah.
you did not have this impulse to go up and say hello and shake hands with everybody. That's not why the guys were there. That's kind of what that's the kind of thing he's getting at here. You know, it's kind of mob flavor.
Well, I'm blanking. What's the Italian word for your entourage, for your posse that comes with you? The it's not fratelli.
Oh
It's
yeah, the mob term.
yeah, it's
Yeah, I forget. I forget. Um,
it's a term like your brothers or your
yeah,
yeah,
your crew. It's a
your
term for
crew.
crew.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a bit of that, I think.
If anyone's curious, if you go Google, Robert Rauschenberg also has
Hmm.
illustrated the
Oh, no
Inferno,
kidding.
and
Really interesting.
it's it's definitely not literal in the same
Yeah,
way that Doré is, or even Botticelli. But if
yeah.
you Google Rauschenberg, and I don't know if he did the whole Commedia, but he did the Inferno for sure.
Hmm. Hmm.
And they're all accessible. Um, Maybe I'll try to post one the next time,
Okay,
anyway, Robert Rauschenberg.
great. Yeah, so that's Dante's way of dealing with this very sensitive topic for him. I think he's just trying to foreclose all discussion by showing how much he disapproves of this. And you know what? I mean, maybe we don't know anything about the circumstances or the justice of his exile, but it's easily imaginable that he could have simply been betrayed by someone over some misstep that he took. And in the culture, the very high pressure culture of Florence at that time, it was a device used simply by his political enemies. That's all that was necessary for him to fall into this terrible condition. But he's clearly chewing on it, and he's using the poem, you might say, to work through this history. He will go on. He will get beyond all of these things, but not until he's out the other end. All right. Any other thoughts?
Well, these Rauschenberg images are definitely worth a look.
Oh, good. Okay. Can you post a link, Bob? Do you have it handy?
In a separate device.
Okay.
I'll send it to you
Where
and
did you
you
find
post
it?
it. I just
Okay.
Google. I just followed instructions.
It just came up. Okay, great. All right. Okay, anybody else? We're good? All right.
I wish everyone an evening of angelic music, um,
Yeah,
instead of
my
instead of
contrast.
the sounds of hell. Kat wants dinner, so she's
All
attacking
right.
me.
All right.
Thank you, everyone. I will send the recording, and we have 3 more sessions of Dante's Inferno, and then I think Elias and I will be in touch about the next 2 books, should
Yeah.
people wish to continue on the journey in the next couple of weeks as well. Um,
Does that mean you're definitely doing it? Oh no, huh? You're not going to commit to that? Shit.
Probably.
Okay.
Aren't, what's your question? Aren't, you're good? Okay. All right. Have a good night,
All right.
everyone.
Thank you all.
Ciao.
Ciao. Everybody stay well.